from 32 to 38. It's where Jesus fed the multitude of 4,000. All right. 32 to 38. I'm gonna read it in English because I'm gonna do this in English. All right. Thir- 32 to 38.
Bro, how'd you even find that? It wasn't even in the red basket thing. Huh?
So Matthew 15:32.
Yeah, 15:32.
Sí.
Not yet. I'm just gonna come in. I'm just gonna open it. I think I have 5.
When you have it, say Amen.
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 Ready.
Then Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude because they continue with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. And his disciples say unto him, When should we have so much bread in the wilderness, as to fill so great a multitude? And Jesus saith unto them, How many loaves have ye? And they said, 7, and a few little fishes. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and the fishes, and gave thanks, and brake them, and gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and were filled, and they took up of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets full. And they that did eat were 4,000 men, beside women and children. Okay, so we're gonna start with the first verse, 32. We're gonna reread the first verse, and it says, Then Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they continue with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat, and I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. So, as we know, the multitude followed Jesus nonstop for 3 days. And this is my assumption, but Jesus' name was heard throughout all of Israel, I'm pretty sure. And probably there was a large amount of people that heard him, but only these people followed him for 3 days. And I imagine there was people who followed him for 1 day and some for 2, but these for 3 nonstop. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. And these people left everything behind to be guided by Jesus. They were fasting and for 3 days, and they followed him into the desert, so they risked their health and lives. And they were at a near-death state, hungry, thirsty, hot. And I also imagine there was some people who, when they saw the desert, they stopped following him. But these people, they kept following him into the desert. And that's gonna bring me to Saint Mark. I'm gonna bring this. Saint Mark 8:34-35. You don't have to go to it. I'm just gonna read it. It says, "And when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it." So these guys risked their lives because they didn't look after their own needs. They looked after following Jesus, and that's why they were true followers. And if we remember, it says, Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude because they continue with me now 3 days. He had compassion on them because they left everything for him and they didn't care about really their own lives. And that brings us to the next verse, verse 33. "And his disciples say unto him, When should we have so much bread in the wilderness as to fill so great a multitude?" So the disciples here are questioning where they get the bread. It looks like there's no bread around. They're in the middle of the desert. They didn't think they had anything to give, and they saw as what they had as little food. And that brings me to the point that sometimes we look around and we say, what do we really have to give? But I just want you guys to know that you'll always have something to give to another, even if you don't believe it. You always have something that will serve as hope to another life. And now for verses 34 and 35. So yeah. And that brings me to another point. I just wanted to share this that I felt in the car. I felt like I needed to share this. In Boston, me and my family held like small cultos. And at first, I would daydream during them, to be honest. But as I started getting more interested, sometimes as we left the cultos and I went out, we stopped doing the cultos. Sometimes I would feel like something within me that was filled. I don't know if you guys are getting what I'm saying, but after we left, it felt like something within me kind of liked hearing the word, and it kind of started passioning in me. That's when it first passioned me. Alright, and now for verses 34 to 35. "And Jesus saith unto them, How many loaves have ye? And they said, 7, and a few little fishes. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground." So the disciples were continuing to doubt, and they continued to see the food as limited. But what Jesus did is he prepared the multitude because he knew that they would receive, even though the disciples didn't think they had anything to give. He acted upon it and told them to sit down because he knew everyone would be filled. And what I want to say is remember that God has no limits, and that whatever seems as small, that's actually good for God because he uses the smallest things to glorify his big name. And an example, I'm not good at talking, but God has put me here, and that's for a reason because I'm small. I'm not good at talking. That's just an example. And so yeah. And verse 36, "And he took the 7 loaves and the fishes and gave thanks, and brake them and gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude." So Jesus gave thanks and then break, as we saw. And firstly, there's a lot of power in gratitude and in being grateful, because if you're thankful for the little things, God will multiply it because he sees that. And that brings me to another verse, which is St. Luke 16:10. You can look for it if you want. I'm just gonna find it. And it says, "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in the much." So if you give thanks for the little things, then it will multiply. As we can see a live example when Jesus break it and gave thanks, and we can see that it multiplied right after. And another thing is he broke the bread in two, and that represents that we're supposed to give what we have to others, and we're supposed to share our blessings. And another thing, Jesus gives to his disciples, this part's important. Jesus gives to his disciples, and his disciples to the multitude. So firstly, they didn't question Jesus, even though it looked like nothing was going to happen. They didn't question him, and they just reparted the bread. And to do that, you need to activate a little bit of faith, because even though it seems like there's nothing to give, if you obey, then be sure that definitely it will be multiplied. And the main point Jesus wanted to do here, the main thing, is Jesus wanted to feed the multitude. He didn't give it to the disciples for them to eat it alone. He wanted to give it to them so they could give it to everyone, and everyone would be able to eat. And it would be distributed quicker. But imagine if the disciples never gave the food portions to the multitude. But that was the main goal, right? They were supposed to feed everyone, so imagine they didn't. The multitude would have starved to death because they didn't get the bread, and the blood would have fallen on the heads of the disciples. So this puts a responsibility on the disciples. They have to activate their faith, and they have to give it to everyone. And if we remember in verse 32, the first verse we read, the very first line, it just says, "Then Jesus called his disciples unto him." The people he had to call to him to tell them that he had compassion on the multitude was the disciples, because those are the people he puts the responsibility on to feed the multitude. And now, yeah, the disciples are people he could rely on. And now for the final two verses, 37 to 38. And they did all eat and were filled, and they took up of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets full. And they that did eat were 4,000 men, beside women and children. So basically, everyone got to eat, but not only did everyone eat, but everyone was filled and they were satisfied. And with the lack of food, the original amount of food, I would imagine not even the disciples would have been filled. But because they shared it, like blessings are supposed to be shared, not only were they filled, but everyone was filled. And that brings me to Proverbs 11:24. Yeah. Proverbs 11:24. There is that scattereth and yet increaseth, and there is that withholdeth more than his meat, but it tendeth to poverty. Basically, that's saying the people who keep the things for themselves, they're always in need of more. But the people who give to others, they always find themselves with everything already in their hands. Because God's the one who supplies, and he sees that you give to others. And that's why they don't have any needs, even though they're constantly giving. And now, I wanted to share my mom's testimony, but I wanted to shorten it because she's gonna share the full one. But basically, she felt in her heart one time to make arroz con dulce. I don't know if you guys know what that is. For the church. And she only made a small amount, but she felt in her heart to make it, and she brought it. But not only did everyone eat that one night, but there was lots of leftovers as well, and some brought home 5 and some 3, and yeah. And I'm gonna go now to get to the main point of what I was speaking. Acts 20. We're gonna go Acts 20 to 35. And we're gonna read it, and it says, I have shewed you all things, how that so laboring we ought to support the weak and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said, this is the part you need to remember right here. It is more blessed to give than to receive. And so basically the point is, like the multitude, you have to be persistent to receive. Even though, don't do it to receive, but be persistent and you will receive. And give to others what you have received. And do it with happiness, because you're supposed to do it out of love. And remember that you are God's servant, and let him guide you. Even if it looks like it's a deadly path, even if it looks like there's no hope, just have faith, and everything will turn out well. You can trust me on that. And trust the word too. So yeah, do that out of love. That's the point. And that's it.